only 20% of us are born optimistic. Ergo, 80% are prone toward pessimism. If you're good at worrying and you worry a lot, you're going to get better at worrying because your brain's going to go there. If we rewire our brains with exercises like we learned from many of the masters in writing this book, you can change that. So shy people don't have to be shy their whole life. Pessimistic people don't have to be miserable with shorter lifespan, worse health outcomes, et cetera, et cetera.
Jim, it's really a pleasure to have you on the Liberty Ventures podcast. And I have to say, first time that I ever really got to know you, as I'm sure you've heard from a lot of other people, was when you were on Undercover Boss many years ago. I loved the show and I loved your episode there. And I'm curious, what was the experience like for you actually being the undercover boss on the show?
Well, it was a wonderful experience because I got to share it with my younger brother. And at the first time when they first approached us, the show hadn't aired yet, so I didn't know what to expect. And at first blush, I didn't like the sound of it, so I turned it down. And there was a young lady who worked with us on some appearance kind of stuff who switched agencies, and all of a sudden she was in charge of the show. And she said, "Do I understand that you turned that show down?" I said, "Yeah, I did." She goes, "You're an idiot. You're doing the show." So CBS aired the show at that time. And what I said was, "Okay, I'll do it, but I want a different twist. Instead of this opening boardroom scene, I'd like to send my younger brother undercover because he's going to be taking over the company, and I want to make sure that he knows every in and out of all the businesses." So that was the premise, and they went along with that. Their only ask, Alexander, was I had to agree to come surprise him in the field, and it genuinely had to be a surprise. He genuinely could not know I was coming. So I said, "So let me understand, you're asking me to give him a hard time and to harass him, which is pretty easy because I've been doing that my whole life." So they agreed to it, and we had a blast doing it. But he did all the heavy work. He was the one who was actually undercover. And I tried to surprise him in California, but although it never rains in Southern California, it was pouring the days he was there, so we couldn't do this outdoor scene we wanted to do. So I wound up surprising him in Brooklyn, New York.
Now, it's interesting you say the reason you wanted your younger brother to do it rather than you is that he was taking over. I remember on the show, the explanation was that you were so public already with 1-800-Flowers on the commercials and your face was so well known that you wouldn't have been able to go undercover at any of the shops.
That contributed, but I'm sure look, this is Hollywood. They can figure out any kind of disguise, right?
Fair enough. Now, it really is incredible what you built with 1-800-Flowers, not only because of how big it is, but the evolutions that it went through, going from, small shop to then being a phone service, then actually switching over to the internet. How did you foresee the changes that happened over the course of your career, and how have you always approached the evolving landscape in the business world?
Well, it's been a long time, Alexander, so lots of things are going to happen in the world around us. So I started with a shop and then a chain of shops. And 10 years in, I had a lot of stores and realized that there was really no great economy of scale here. It's a very interesting business, the florist business. And oftentimes, most times, they're family businesses because we have these peaks and valleys, holidays where your demand goes 10x what it is a normal week. And how do you flex to handle that? And it's best done by families where you can recruit Uncle Joe and your nephew and everyone else who wants to come over for Thanksgiving dinner. The quid pro quo is we need extra delivery people and store people on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So family takes personal time from IBM to come work with us. And that's been the case in the flower industry for forever. And when we realized there was no scale, I went looking for alternatives. And it was so long ago, it was at the very beginning of the use of 800 numbers. And I just thought that if we could get a number that corresponded with a name that corresponded with our number, so it was easy to remember on pneumatic phone pads, which are going away as well, then we didn't have to spend all that money on advertising. And we got very, very lucky in that everyone was talking about 800 numbers and the change in how people did commerce, that we were the poster child for a lot of that because we were indeed the first company whose name was its telephone number. And then none of the modalities we used for connection ever go away. So we still have retail stores. And now the 800 number took over as the primary access modality. And I remember everybody in 1986, 87 telling us, no one wants to order flowers 24 hours a day. No one's going to use a credit card over the phone. And obviously all of those things were wrong because our lodestar, our touch point was always how do we become more accessible, more convenient for our consumers so that they can act more likely or briskly on their thoughtful intentions. So if you say, geez, I'd like to say thank you to so-and-so for a something they did for me, helping me with my travel plans, if we're as easy and as convenient as the access to a mobile device, then you're more likely to act on that, on your thoughtfulness. And so our driving motivation has always been convenience. And when your name is now 1-800-Flowers.com, you don't ever have to say convenient because the name screams that. But we still have stores. We still have tens of thousands of people call us every day. And of course, the next wave for us was we embraced the internet very early on because we started with the name 1-800-Flowers in 1986. And by 1991, 92, we were a household name. And we did that with no money and no real knowledge of how to make that happen, but we caught lightning in a bottle. And then my younger brother, Chris, who was the key character in Undercover Boss, he was always playing around with the new technologies. He was just recently out of university, and he was always playing with the new technologies. And we counted over 50 technologies that we tried, but the only one we kept coming back to was this online world, not yet called the internet. So we were the first thing you could do on AOL, and the first way you could transact on AOL. The only thing you could do was us. And so we were early again to the internet, so early that it didn't matter that we had a website in 1992. No one could find you, no one cared. But in 1995, Mark Andreessen introduced Netscape, a browser, which now began to organize the internet and give you the ability to find things. And all of a sudden, it began to matter a lot. And in the next 3 years, it just overtook us. And in 1999, we decided to go public because we needed the capital to keep up with this surge and change in the retail landscape. So we did. And that was a good thing that we did because it gave us the capital we had. We went from no competitors to 20 plus finance competitors in 3 years. And then they all started to melt away, but because we had the capital to withstand that. And then 2008, 2009, the financial crisis happens, and we had to pare back on our projects of the future. We had about 17 or 18 that we were conducting at the same time. And when the financial crisis hit, we had to lower that number to 4 or 5. And 2 of them was the redoing of our technology infrastructure. The second one was everything social. And the third was everything mobile. And those turned out to be good insights. Again, you just watch the landscape around you, see where the big trends are going. And clearly mobile was going to catch on, and clearly it was going to be aiding and abetting everything social. So that was a good bet we made. And now this next wave is probably the most exciting, scary, and challenging all at the same time. And that is this move to engagement commerce using AI tools and the such. I think it's probably going to be the biggest change in our long history. But we're embracing it, and we're excited about the possibilities, but no less concerned about the things we don't know.
So there's so much in that story that I want to weave together, and you're already jumping ahead. I've heard you say the word Lodestar, and of course want to ask you about your new book, Lodestar, because I finished reading it before this call and was just blown away by the insights and suggestions in there. And one of them is an emphasis on people leaning into relationships, including in business. And at the start of your journey, you emphasized how most flower shops were, and perhaps the smaller ones are, family businesses, and they're built on relationships more than anything else. And I'm wondering if that was the start of your emphasis on relationships in business, that experience with those first few flower shops.
I'd say, Alexander, I'd say yes. In that, as I think about that first flower shop we had, it was on the Upper East Side of New York. It was a small shop. And we were like, even though it's Manhattan, the Upper East Side is residential, and but a short walk to Midtown. We were the little neighborhood centerpiece. That is, people would come into our shop all the time, not just to transact. They'd come in to say hello, make themselves a cup of coffee. We always kept a coffee station in the front of the store for people to come in. We didn't have a separate workroom in the back. Everything was right out in the front. And so we were always engaging with the community. And we became like the little social node of people dropping off packages for people who weren't home and things like that. And the irony is that was 40 years ago. And fast forward 40 years, we're just trying to mimic those same relationships we had back then with 40 million customers today. And the only way you can do that is with the effective use of technology. And so engaging, we've come to realize that we're not really in the flower and gift business. We're really in the relationship business. That is helping our consumers have more and better relationships in their life. And sometimes that rises to the occasion of purchasing a gift. And if we've been helpful to you along the way, we hope we've earned your consideration when a gift is appropriate. So for example, Alexander, at the very beginning of COVID, March of 20, we didn't know what to do in terms of communication with our customers. We didn't know what impact it would have on our business when the world started to shut down. But we knew we needed to communicate with our customers somehow. So a young lady who was my chief of staff at the time said, why don't you just write to our customers what we're talking about, how it's impacting us, how you think it's going to impact other people. And so I did. I wrote a newsletter and sent it out on a Sunday to some of our customers. And the feedback was terrific. And what I felt like I had permission to write about was relationships and how important they were. And at the and these two ideas come together because at the very beginning of COVID, I read an article maybe in April of that year in Psychology Today by this psychologist named Dr. George Everly. And I indeed, and I was so blown away by this article, I wrote him a fan letter. I said, Dr. Everly, I read your piece. I think it's really insightful. And what was it about? He was speculating about how this lockdown would impact us from a mental health perspective in terms of our relationships, relationships with your children, with your spouse, with your friends, with your coworkers, children with their fellow students. And I thought he was spot on. It just, when you read something, just, that person gets it. So I wrote him a fan letter. I said, I thought it was terrific. And I said, geez, I hope we have occasion to talk someday. So he wrote back, says, well, I'd like to talk to you. Why don't we make it happen? And we did. And we became friends. And we started getting all these inquiries from our community about relationships. And I didn't have the expertise, nor did I on my small team think we had the expertise to handle those questions. So we sought out what became the Connectivity Council. And it was about 6 or 8 of the most talented and thoughtful psychologists and educators that we came to know. And one of them, the first one of those was George Everly. And it was 2.5 years ago, he called me, and I was in Florida driving with my wife. And so he was on speakerphone. And he said, Jim, I've been loving the work we're doing on Celebrations Pulse, our newsletter. And he says, really, we're getting into some really interesting relationship dialogue with your community. And obviously there's a huge interest here because we have so many people contacting us, reaching out to us in every way imaginable. And he said, I'm really enjoying this work too. Why don't we write a book about it? And so I was flattered to know him because this man's a genius, in my opinion. And he's so wise beyond his intellect. And I was just flattered as all get out. And it was an excuse for me to hang around with him and learn more from him. So I look over at my wife, who's giving me the evil eye about maybe I'm overcommitted. And so, of course, I said, George, I'd love to. And she gave me a little whack in the arm to express her disagreement with me. But it was a 2.5 year project because it was a lot of work. But I loved it, Alexander, because I got to work with this really, really smart man who's smart. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Talk about achievement. Here's a man who grew up in a small town outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and was undiagnosed right up until college that he was severely dyslexic. And so I'll take you back to his high school years. So he's a junior in high school. The guidance counselor calls his dad in and says, I think George is not going to go to college for sure. He may not even graduate from high school. I'd recommend you consider taking him out of school and finding him a job in a factory or a filling station or something, because he needs to get a head start off his other graduates around here, because he's just not going to make it. He's not that bad a kid, but he's clearly hyperactive and not able to do the work. And George's father told him that story on the day he received his first PhD. And George turned to his dad and said, "Dad, why did you wait all these years to tell me that?" He said, "Because I didn't want it to become self-fulfilling." And that's such a lesson, because this man who has severe dyslexia, who wasn't able to read a book until he finally taught himself how to get through reading a book, which is not easy. Lodestar, which you mentioned, is his 29th book. So we can change things. George is an accomplished musician, can't read a note for music. Toured with Gladys Knight and the Pips and the Temptations. He's a former bodybuilder, a consultant to the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team. Has an MBA. He became an accountant and got his MBA because his dad did. Talked his way into the University of Maryland. Has taught for 40 years at the university level at a couple of places like Harvard and currently Johns Hopkins University. He's on the faculty of the School of Medicine on the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins and the School of Medicine. So this is a man who his guidance counselor was sure would not get out of high school. I think it's 3 PhDs, and a great thinker, an expert on trauma and PTSDs, and has worked in 40 different countries around the world, helping governments and agencies figure out help first responders and accident victims at all. So what a treat for me to spend a year, 2.5 years learning from a guy who's become a wonderful friend. He's just a terrific man and as smart can be.
That is an incredible story. And I mean, both of you are incredibly accomplished, but you're touching on another lesson in Lodestar that I really appreciated, where you two wrote that asking for assistance helps others. It's not just for yourself. And clearly, the two of you talking with each other to learn from each other and him asking you to work on this book was not just asking for assistance for him. You appreciated that as an opportunity for you as well.
Very much so. You know, it's like one of the things we've learned in the flower and gift business, Alexander, is that giving, the act of giving, and George has helped us a lot on this, the act of giving releases endorphins in our own brain. And it goes back to the very center of the brain and what easy to stimulate with behavior. And he's taught us that giving is the gift. And one of our board members, a longtime friend, coined that term for us a few years ago. And it really does encapsulate. So the whole idea of asking someone for help is like giving a gift. It's an engagement. It's a sign of respect. It's a relationship builder. It's intimate, and it's humble. And so, yeah, I think one of the lessons I learned from George in working on Lodestar was that it's not showing a sign of weakness. It's showing a sign of trust and confidence and intimacy to ask someone else for help.
So we touched on two of the big lessons in Lodestar, but I am really curious, when writing the book, what was either your favorite part to develop in there, your favorite lesson, or the most surprising thing that you discovered about yourself as you were writing it?
I'll take you back to the earliest part of the book. Let's look at George's lesson. He learned to rewire his own brain to compensate for his genuine genetic disabilities. And the theory there that he's taught us is that it's about neuroplasticity. That is, our brains are changing all the time. So that the negative lesson to learn there, to be aware of there, is that our brains are lazy. They will go to the easiest thing to do. You know that one of the things I also learned in this project is only 20% of us are born optimistic. There go 80% are prone toward pessimism. And that's a defense we've learned since the beginning of time. But if you look at optimists, optimists have measurably better success in life. They have more and better relationships in life. They're healthier, happier, and in every measurable way, scientifically, medically, they're in better condition. So, but we're prone toward natural pessimism. But if we rewire our brains with exercises like we learned from many of the masters in writing this book, you can change that. So we can change our brains. But keep in mind, if you're good at worrying and you worry a lot, you're going to get better at worrying because your brain's going to go there. If you get anxious easily, your brain's going to get better at getting anxious easily. So you have to be deliberate about your thinking path and your behavioral circumstances to condition your brain to go where it's not comfortable and easy, but will benefit from a rewiring to take advantage of neuroplasticity. That is, you can change your brain and you can make yourself more optimistic, maybe even become an optimist. So shy people don't have to be shy their whole life. Pessimistic people don't have to be miserable with shorter lifespan, worse health outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. We can train ourselves, but it takes effort and it takes deliberate behavior.
It's like building a new habit, and we can build habits for our brains as well, is what you're getting at here.
Exactly, and we cite so many good books that we think. I was shocked to learn that there are 85,000 self-help books in print today. I was shocked to learn that it's a $10 billion a year industry. Wow. So in learning that, I'll tell you that there's a lot of good stuff out there, a lot of good theories, and we came to these 10 pillars of what we think are great foundational learnings that'll help you to decipher what else do I want to read out there, where else do I want to go, and we cite over 100 works that we think highly of, including, speaking of habits, James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, which goes to the point that you just made, Alexander, which is we can train our brains like any habit, but it takes deliberate behavior, thought process, and execution.
I'm really intrigued by the story of how you and George connected with this because it sounds like you didn't meet in person for a long time and then ended up writing this book together. And that gets to your earlier point that the best way for us to develop more relationships in today's world and for businesses with larger customer bases and partners is through technology. And I'm really curious what you see as the way for people to leverage technology today and some of the new stuff that you were mentioning at the beginning, like AI coming out to actually build relationships instead of hinder them, which is the way a lot of people think about that.
Well, it doesn't seem possible, but it was only coming up on 5 years ago that this technology that we're using today didn't exist. How much tougher would COVID have been on us emotionally, psychologically, socially, and economically if we didn't have Teams or Zoom, this video technology, or Riverside in this case? It would have been much tougher. So George and I did not meet in person for the first 2 years of our relationship, but I called him one of my COVID buddies. Because we genuinely had a relationship. We hadn't met in person, and we made a good joke of it. But then once we started this project, George came up and I had him speak to everybody at 1-800-Flowers and our related companies because I just wanted to share him with the team. And we got to talk about some of the work we'd already done on Lodestar. And so any chance I can to tap into George, we've had him come up and speak with our leadership teams a few times now. Nice to have him over to the house for dinner and get to expose him to your adult kids and your grandkids because I just think he's a gift.
Amazing.
I had that same experience one other time, Alexander. I used to do some public speaking and I was asked to do a tour one time. This is 15, maybe 20 years ago. And the tour would go every week. It would be in another city, and you had these great speakers. And somehow they asked me to participate. I'm not sure why, but I jumped at the opportunity because the star of the show in each of the 14 or 15 cities we went to was a man by the name of Zig Ziglar. And Zig Ziglar was the dean of personal improvement, self-help, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful man. And because I knew he was the headliner, I agreed to do the tour because it was an excuse to hang around with Zig. And Zig, now this is so long ago, I used to play cassettes in the car. So I have the 3 kids in the car, my wife and the 3 kids, and we'd be driving someplace and I'd play Zig Ziglar's cassettes. And my kids swore they weren't listening because they'd have their little headphones on. This is pre-devices. Well, Zig comes to New York and we're doing an appearance in the Meadowlands, and we're doing one on Long Island, the Long Island Coliseum. So I said, Zig, if you're going to be in town, I'd love to have you come over for dinner. So I think it was a Thursday night, maybe we're doing a Friday night, all-day Friday event. And so Thursday night he comes over for dinner, and I have my 3 teenage kids there. And we're sitting around the table, and although it's a school night, we sat there till like 1:30 in the morning. And I was thrilled, Alexander, as a dad, because this is one of my heroes, a man I've learned so much from, and been running around the country with him as one of his many opening acts, just as an excuse to get to know him and hear him and learn from him. And I hear my kids who swore they weren't listening. They say, "Oh, Mr. Ziegler, please tell me the Wilma Rudolph story. Oh, and tell me the story about..." And so this is the second bite of the apple for me, because I've had the opportunity to introduce George to my family and have them get to know him and hear about all our work sessions. And frankly, they were so dense. I started recording them because I couldn't absorb it all in one sitting. I'd have to go back and listen to parts of those sessions at night just to make sure I captured all the jewels from him.
And I think there's a deep lesson in there, not only about parenting and children, where children are listening and paying attention to things that you don't know if they are or not, and you might think they're not. And it's the same actually with companies too. Employees, customers, investors, everyone, they're paying attention to everything that you're doing, whether you realize it or not. And the smallest things may actually have a huge impact on them.
Indeed. Those of us who are trying to run a school or a business, any of us in leadership roles in any kind of organization, where we'd like to influence our culture. And indeed, that's all we can do. We certainly can't control it. So how do we influence it? We have a few dials in front of us. Dials are: who do we hire? Who do we fire? What do we reward? What do we tolerate? What don't we tolerate? We're sending signals, as you say, all the time. How do we behave? That's why you hear people talk about, in the military, leaders eat last. Because it is about leadership and it is about signaling. So we can't control it, but we can influence it. And we're all about trying to influence the cultures of our organizations all the time. And it's like being an optimist or a pessimist. If you're conscious of it, you're more likely to be deliberate and beneficial to that culture. One of the things that's had a great influence on the culture at the flowers companies that I didn't realize the impact of, frankly, started, it'll be 10 years ago this year. My brother Chris and I were running the company, and I'm the oldest of 5, Chris the youngest, 10 years my junior. And we have a middle brother, Kevin, who was born with developmental disabilities. And we have 2 sisters on either side of Kevin. And he lives in a wonderful group home on Long Island. He's doing well. But the fellow who founded the agency that runs the group home that my brother is in is a wonderful guy. It's a terrific not-for-profit agency, now called Connection. And his name is Walter Stockton. And he called us 10 years ago and said, Jim and Chris, your brother Kevin would be doing a lot better if I could find him a job in the community. But I can't. And I have hundreds of others like him that could and should be working, but I can't find jobs for them. But I do have an idea. Let's get together for dinner, bring your checkbook. And his idea was, let's buy this piece of property, build greenhouses on it, and create work opportunities for your brother and 35 other adults and they can earn a paycheck, they can have a job, they'll be learning skills, and you know and I know, work isn't just about a paycheck. It's also social. It's it's who we are. It's why we get up in the morning. It's our raison d'etre. So we did that 10 years ago. We created Smile Farms, a not-for-profit. And he said, this would be good because you have all these florists, and now I know if we grow stuff, who will buy it? And so it's worked out terrific. And fast forward, we have 14 campuses now, mostly doing ag in the greenhouses, but now we're training people for the hospitality industry as well. And I tell you that as part of the answer to your cultural question, because it's had such a beneficial effect on our culture. Because the kind of people come to work for us, many of them come because they found out about Smile Farms and they want to get involved. Maybe they volunteered with their friends who work at Flowers on one of our events, our fundraising events, or they did it. They and their company came and did a day in our greenhouses where they do a team building exercise. And so it's had a tremendous cultural benefit to us that Chris and I did not fully appreciate when we started down this path. It'll be 10 years this year, 2025. So it's a lesson I've learned, but companies have to decide what charitable things they're going to be involved in, even if they're a charity, and how do they pick their people? And I know when I walk through the office and I see someone, I said, wait a minute, we met a few months ago. They said, yes, I was volunteer at the golf outing that Smile Farms put on. And I came with my friend Diane, and I so enjoyed getting to meet everybody from Flowers and getting to feel the culture of your company. I applied for a job and I started here last Monday. And that happens all the time. So it helps us in terms of recruiting the right kind of people, have their heart in the right place. And it's when we just have a big gala in the wintertime in Manhattan, a big annual dinner. And it's a big, big event. We have 40 people as volunteers at that event, getting people checked in at the right seats and everything. And we get 70 or 80 people sign up the first day it's available to take their own time off to come volunteer because it's fun, and B, they want to be part of something that's doing something that means something.
Jim, I'm just so inspired by everything that you're sharing here and think this is so valuable for everyone in the Liberty Ventures Network. I have to ask, you talked about being optimistic and you've talked about a lot of what's happened in the past, but also things that are coming up for the future. And I'm curious, where are you finding yourself spending your time these days? And what are you optimistic about, especially at the start of the new year when we're doing this recording?
Well, optimistic about a few things. I mentioned early on that we think this new technology wave changes a lot of things. I can confess to you that I don't really understand what or fully appreciate where it's going. This one's much more complicated. Every day and several times a day, I'm mouth open about what the new technology is likely to be able to do, what it can do now, what it's likely to be able to do. It's only 2 years ago that ChatGPT made its debut in our lives. And look how it's changed so quickly since then. So I think it's scary. I think it's exciting. I think it gives us a potential to be even more convenient and accessible for consumers. I am excited about the ways that we can help them. We have a new product now for, I think it's $5 or so. You can design your own greeting card. We'll print it, sign it for you. You can do the signing and we'll help you with. So for Mother's Day, we have something called Momverse. It's an AI technology where it says, tell us a little bit about the mom you're celebrating this Mother's Day. We'll put it in a card for you. We'll print it. We'll put the picture you want on the card, and we'll drop it into the mailbox in the zip code right by her today, and put a postage stamp on it, and she'll have it tomorrow or the next day. And we're excited about that technology because it's something that everyone can do. It's $5 or so. And it's a self-designed card. So for me, last Mother's Day, I said my wife likes to garden. She loves baking, and she teaches her grandkids how to bake, and they look forward to that every holiday. They all come over and they bake pies for the holiday with Grandma. And she likes gardening, baking. She likes a glass of wine every now and again, and loves spending time with her grandkids. And boom, it says to me, would you like a poem? Would you like a sonnet? Would you like a limerick? And boom, it comes out. Now, my wife knows I'm not creative, but to see her get emotional when she read the card because it composed a beautiful poem about her and her activities, makes me feel great. But that's just a simple little use of the technology to help us to have more and better relationships. So that's what keeps me awake at night and excited every morning.
I absolutely love that, and I'm excited by that as well, and then the possibilities for others listening to be inspired by that, not for what they're doing.
Now, as an investor, are you investing in AI?
Absolutely, we've invested in several AI companies.
There'll be lots of hits.
It is a growing space right now, both for companies that are AI and those that are realizing that AI needs to be incorporated into what they do. I mean, you wouldn't call 1-800-Flowers an AI company, but you're figuring out how to leverage this technology for.
Every company has to figure it out. Uh, a fellow I know and think the world of, his name is Seth Godin, and Seth publishes every day a blog. And maybe 8 weeks ago, he published something that said, to each of us as workers, if you're not trying to figure out how to use AI to do your job better, faster, and more automated, and leaving you time to do the things only a human can do, rest assured your boss is trying to figure that out. And if he doesn't or she doesn't figure it out, if you don't figure it out before them, you're in trouble. And I think that's great advice, because we should be, you can't say, well, I don't want the world to change. No, please don't tell me anything. It's just not the proper way to deal with change. So we should be using it to say, how can we take waste and inefficiency out of everything we do, so that it frees us up to spend more time with the people we want to spend time with, to do things only humans can do. And those things are becoming fewer and fewer.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are those things that you think only humans can do, especially when you're talking about Mother's Day cards, including poems written by AI instead of human beings,
Well, heretofore, what would you do? It sounds silly, but you used to walk into a card store or a supermarket or a drugstore, and you'd go through some cards, and they really didn't say much of anything. And now that seems like, oh my God, that's so backwards. When I can put exactly the image I want on the card, I can say exactly what I want and have it make a real connection, not just say, okay, this doesn't seem to say anything, so no one's going to be offended here. It just changes the game.
Okay, so what are the things that you think only humans are going to do?
Relationships, as we talked about, although we're both seeing some interesting technologies where people can have companions that are not human. And it might be very beneficial, particularly for someone who lives alone and needs to be reminded to take their medications and to get up and move and to do their exercise and do their physical therapy. And so I think it's going to have some real beneficial effects there in that relationship context. Loneliness is a problem that we write about and have looked at a lot and concerns me a great deal. But now some of these tools will really help in that regard. So it's all about relationships. It's all about cognitive process. But if you're filling out a spreadsheet every day and you're pulling data from here and there to put it in a spreadsheet, and you're not sure if anyone reads it, but that's your job, well, that's not going to be your job a year from now.
I completely agree with that. And I think it actually leans more into the rational side of being human and the philosophical and creative side that we have, because AI is going to be able to replace a lot of the rote activities, and it can actually be creative to a certain extent, but it's always the case that human beings are able to think in a more abstract level and be able to come up with what really matters and direct AI to the most important tasks or figure out how to do things better. But Jim, I want to respect your time. We could keep going for another hour, but really, thank you for sharing all of this, for everything you're doing, and for writing Lodestar. I just really enjoyed that and encourage everyone here to go and check it out as well.
Alexander, thank you. It was a pleasure to do, and it's nice to get to see you again. And I can't wait to see when we revisit this a year from now to see how much things have changed.
Let's put it on the calendar. We'll make it happen.